What's up, future millionaires? It's Mike the Investor, and are you investing for 6 to 12 months or 6 to 12 years? And the reason why I asked that question is because there's a big difference between short-term investing and long-term investing. And we're going to be diving into the details between what separates both of those strategies. Now, before diving into it, definitely take advantage of grabbing some free Bitcoin by using the Voyager and BlockFi link down below, and there are other useful crypto tools in the description as well. But enough talking, let's jump into it. Alright, crypto investors, welcome back to the channel. Now, there are timestamps down below, of course, if you do want to look at some specific parts in this video. But in simplest terms, we understand the difference between short-term and long-term investors is the time span that they actually hold their investments. But we're going to be diving into what truly separates the two investing strategies. But before we do, this video is brought to you by Market Rebellion, a platform that helps you with the fundamentals on technical analysis that'll help us with better buying opportunities and better selling opportunities. So if that sounds good to you, hit the Market Rebellion link down below and you get $25 off your first month when signing up. All right, future millionaires, so now you know where to go to for technical analysis if you're looking for that. But let's go ahead and dive into this beautiful article that really breaks down the difference between short-term and long-term investment strategies. Let's check it out. And so we can see here just the simplest definition is a short-term investment is any asset you hold for 1 year or less, where most investors hold short-term investments for no more than a few months at a time, if not several weeks. A long-term investment is an asset you hold for more than 1 year. Most investors hold long-term investments for several years as part of an overall strategy for their portfolio. And so now let's kind of dive into the details of what really separates them. And so let's go ahead and move down a little bit. And so we can see a short-term investment and long-term investments are distinguished by how you use them. This is very important as investors to understand. And so a short-term investment are financial instruments that you hold for less than a year. Most traders will hold a short-term investment for several months at the most, looking for profit off volatility and near-term gains. Now, keep in mind that any asset can technically be a short-term investment. Most will share a few common features. And so I'm not going to go into all of that, but you can pause the screen right here if you're curious on that. And so let's look down at the long-term part. And so long-term investments are financial instruments that you hold for more than a year. Most traders hold these investments for several years at a time, building them into portfolios with a specific strategy. Now, also, any asset can be a long-term investment because it all depends on how the investor uses it. Now, however, it says common long-term investment gains value slowly but predictably, making them better assets to hold over several years. And so let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit further. And this is talking about the role of short-term and long-term investments. And so the volatility part says short-term investments trend toward more volatility assets than long-term positions. While volatility isn't necessarily a benefit for investments that last years, short-term traders generally rely on it to realize a profit. Now, when we look down to the smaller movement, which is going to pertain to long-term investments, it says short-term investments tend to seek out positions that will gain or lose less value than long-term investments. A trader has less time for a short-term investment to regain any value that it lost, which is very important to understand what strategy you're going to use. And so now as we look at the aggressive side, long-term investments can take a more aggressive position than short-term ones because they can better afford losses. An investor who plans on holding a particular asset for several years has time to recover any lost value, which can often happen with aggressive or risky investments. Short-term investments have considerably less room for this kind of error. Now, when you look at the passive versus active investing, we can see active investors often hold short-term positions. These traders move their products fairly often, which by definition tends to make their assets short-term investments. Now, by contrast, passive investors generally buy and hold their assets for longer periods of time. Again, by definition, this tends to make their assets long-term investments. And as we move down to the last section of this part here, this is the immediate versus horizon goals. And it says investors who have immediate goals will generally hold short-term investments. All of these positions will likely close out within the coming year. Now, then there are investors with horizon goals. These are investors who are saving and trading for something far in the future. And investors won't close this position out within the next year. Instead, they'll hold this. And so right there can really tell you the difference between short-term and long-term investment strategies. Now, the question is, can you do both strategies? And my answer is yes, you can. And as an investor, I think it's wise to have positions for the long term and have positions for the short term. And that way you can capitalize on both type of gains. And I think this is very important for investors to understand. Whether you're dealing with crypto or the stock market, this information can be applied to both asset classes. All right, future millionaires, so now that we understand the difference between short-term investment strategies and long-term investment strategies, you can see that I am mostly a long-term investor, which I've said from the beginning of my journey. I do have positions that I am prepared to take profits on in the short term as well, which I said a little bit earlier. I think as an investor, it is wise for us to have long-term positions and short-term positions. And not only that, we should have short-term goals and long-term goals with those positions as well. So that way, if the unexpected happens quicker than we expect as far as time frame, we can go ahead and take those profits, and we have a plan on what we're going to do with those profits. And this is why it's important to not only have short and long-term positions, but you want to have short and long-term goals as well to go along with those positions. Alright, so let's do a quick recap on what we covered in this video. So as we understand, the simplest definition between short-term and long-term investments is the amount of time that the investor is holding those investments. Now, we also understood that any investment can be short-term or it can be long-term. It just depends on how the investor actually uses it. And then also we understand there are different rules that a short-term investor may use compared to a long-term investor, whereas a long-term investor may be a little bit more aggressive and take more of a risk because they have time on their side, whereas a short-term investor who's wanting to get profits quicker, they may not be as risky with certain things. Now, this all depends on your risk tolerance and how you invest, but as a basic fundamental level, that is the difference between short-term and long-term investing. Now, if you gain some value from this video, most importantly, definitely smash the like button. And for those of you that's still watching this video to the end, I want to say thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And also share this out with someone you know as well. Not only does it help out the channel, but it also helps other people who are investors to understand what the difference is between short and long-term investment strategies. But that's all I got for you. Remember to stay inspired, stay motivated, always invest in yourself, and I'm out.